Okay, it's setting up now. And Sina, you're going to take it off once it starts going.
So let me know when.
I will. Come on.
Are we on?
Not yet. Oops. It was weird. It went quicker last time. Oh, now we are. We're good to go.
Okay. Good afternoon. My name is Teresina Obi, and I'm a culture coordinator / prevention specialist at Two Feathers. Today, we are very excited to have our guest speaker, Tia Peters, on our virtual Indigenous speaker series. For those of you just tuning in, we are for the first time having Two Feathers conduct these virtual Indigenous speakers as a place where we can talk about Indigenous issues. Specifically, we focus on Indigenous peoples' histories, cultural, and values, Indigenous education, and Indigenous mental health. Or this is a place for positivity, for a safe place, and to hear from our local and national experts. Our speaker series is really for a place for both Native and non-Native people to talk about our strengths, what's going on in Indigenous communities and our contributions, and how we continue the thread of our existence here. So on to you, Shay.
Hi, everybody. My name is Shaylin Maston. I am the cultural coordinator for Two Feathers Native American Family Services, and I am honored to introduce Miss Tia Oros Peters, who is Shiwi. She has been actively engaged in social, cultural, and environmental justice organizing for over 3 decades. She is a Chief Executive Officer of the 7th Generation Fund for Indigenous Peoples, where she has worked for the past 27 years. The 7th Generation Fund is an identity-based Native philanthropic advocacy, capacity building, and leadership development organization founded in 1977 that supports the community generated strategies for Native peoples, cultural revitalization, movement building, self-determination, and re-indigenization. So Ms. Tia, if you want to introduce yourself a little more and we can get going.
Thank you, Shay, and thank you, Sina, for that lovely beginning to be a part of this speaker series. What a great honor. I want to first thank the Indigenous peoples of this area, the Wiyot. I'm sitting right now in Wiyot territory. I'd also like to recognize and thank the Indigenous peoples of surrounding areas, the Yurok, the Karuk, the Talawa, and the Hupa people, and whose territories are adjacent to this area. I want to recognize the spirits that are with us, even in this format, the spirits ancient and everlasting who are with us, who guide us, who inform us, who are sharing with us their knowledge in their ancestor way about what we're going to talk about. These important issues that have to do with our peoples, our communities, the well-being of our future generations. This is especially apparent that the ancestors are with us at this time of mass pandemic, global upheaval, and a transition of time and space, of spirit and of energy that we're in today. Our organization, the 7th Generation Fund for Indigenous Peoples, as Shay shared, is 43 years old. And we're a transnational organization. We work with Indigenous communities all over the globe. So we have an interesting perspective and have an opportunity to have a touch of the pulse of the Indigenous world. To give you just a little bit of a glimpse of some of the work that we do, we're sharing a video with you called The Power of Native Nonprofits. Shay, would you play that for us? And then I could speak a little bit afterwards. Thank you. What?
Take the time.
Hello all, sorry about that. We're having some technical difficulties with the sound, but Tia, would you please explain a little bit about the video that we were going to watch?
Yeah, and maybe we can put it at the end of this together. And it's called The Power of Native Nonprofits. And we did it collectively with some of the other nonprofit leaders in the Indigenous world and Indian country. And it shares what the kind of work that we do, which is community building, community organizing, community building, to nurture and nourish the kinds of work that's happening in our communities amongst our peoples collectively, that helps build the good. A lot of times, we make the news because of the negative. We hold an infamous lead of socioeconomic and health negative indicators, right? Everything is what we aren't, what we haven't, what we lost. And those things are also true. But the work of the Seventh Generation Fund and many of our partners in the field is, what can be, what is the hope, what is the potential, what are we doing, what's positive, what have we retained, what are we sustaining, what are we growing? That's really what the Seventh Generation Fund is about. So as Shay mentioned, my name is Tia Oros Peters. I'm a mother and a grandmother, an auntie, a sister, a wife, and a mother. I'm a land defender and I'm a water protector. With the Pulikla people here, I'm also a woman of world renewal ceremony. They've become my own people. This beautiful place of redwood trees and bears and deer, and an opportunity to participate here and to contribute from this little place in the Indigenous world, which is really its own center of the world also. I also serve as the Chief Executive Officer of the Seventh Generation Fund. And if we could go to the first slide, Shay, I'd like to share that we are a transnational organization, as I was mentioning earlier. That means we work everywhere. We work all over the Indigenous world. We're not bounded by colonial borders. We're not bounded by colonial thinking. We're not bounded by the way colonizers or settlers have seen us or want to control us. We create our own reality through the work that we do. And that means that we work with Indigenous peoples all over. That first slide, if we can share that, is probably the very essence of what we do, which is re-indigenization. So yes, we do decolonization work. We work with our people so that we can support what they're doing, to help people reclaim their indigeneity, to support the positive work that's happening at the community level. But what for? Why would we do decolonization? Where does that go? Really, the next step is the re-indigenization, not to focus on what we're undoing so much all the time and only, but to see that it leads somewhere. Re-indigenization, which is the active and dynamic process of recovering traditional relationship to land, community, culture, and spirit, for self-determination, for collective liberation, and to restore balance. If we're doing anything to do more than survive and to thrive, it's also to restore balance within ourselves individually, within our families, within our communities, within our peoples more widely, and certainly within this global world. It's particularly important to think about re-indigenization now, at this time when the world is in pandemic and panic, when there's social and cultural, political, economic upheaval. Where are we going? Do we really want to return to normal? Was normal healthy? Is now a time for us to reimagine a world where we can have restored balance? So that is the focus of our work. Previously and in this time, it makes no difference. May we have the next slide, please? So providing grassroots projects that are in the Indigenous world that don't have 501c3, which is nonprofit tax determination. So they don't have nonprofit status. They come within the embrace of the Seventh Generation Fund, and we provide for them services, community organizing support, fiscal oversight and management, program planning. We help them, and maybe some people would say we incubate those projects. And in some instances, sometimes they grow their own arms and legs and wings and grow and become an independent organization. But they really also sometimes stay with Seventh Generation Fund. We have some affiliates that have been with us maybe 30 years that want to be part of the community of projects that we hold in-house. They're part of the Seventh Generation Fund family. And we have affiliate projects that are in the Global South. We have affiliate projects, so down in Ecuador and in other places in the Global South. We have them north of the Medicine Line, up in Canada. We also have relationships with organizations all over the world, as well as about 30 here in the so-called United States. Could you share the next slide, please? So community empowerment and cultural revitalization or cultural vitality is another one of our projects. It is a program that supports strategies for rebuilding our viable culturally, ecologically, spiritually, and ecologically healthy communities, grounded in Indigenous languages, our creative expression and lifeways. This could be work that we're doing in and around revitalizing languages in Indigenous communities, work that, it's a picture of me in that case, in gardening and feeding ourselves. At this time more than ever, I noticed that people are beginning to return to their fields. One of our community partners in Hopi has been talking a lot about the revitalization of community gardening in Hopi, as well as a variety of other places where we need to take responsibility for feeding ourselves and getting away from the corporate industry and nursing ourselves on that. We can feed ourselves from our own gardens and through barter and exchange from each other. Traditional languages, Indigenous languages, traditional life ways, Indigenous economies that are based on relationships and on regeneration, on responsibility to each other and on reciprocity is also work that we do within this program area. Shay, would you share the next slide, please? Land defenders and water protectors. So we're not protesters, we are protectors of our lands, of sacred lands, of territories, of our rights, of the rights of Mother Earth, where she has a right to be protected her own self, as does water, to flow freely and to be free of aquacide. The land has a right to be free of terracide. Sacred sites have a right to be protected and nourished and loved and engaged with by Indigenous peoples that know those areas and can gather from that the power, the energy, the knowledge, the songs that can serve the Indigenous world as well as the world at large. A lot of this work is frontline, really frontline and very direct action. And we support this type of work all over the Indigenous world, from Aotearoa in New Zealand to north of the Medicine Line, where women are putting tiny houses. You may have heard of the tiny house warriors, putting tiny houses in the way of pipelines. So this is the type of work that we do that is direct action and always in peace and always for protection. Would you put the next slide up, please? Our Thriving Women's work is really something we've been doing for a really long time, because this perspective is based on the understanding that what happens to the earth happens and is expressed in the bodies of Indigenous women and girls. Specifically, we are the personification of the earth herself as Indigenous women and girls. This is a really specifically Indigenous perspective, and quite beautiful when we think about the beauty of the earth, the power of the earth, and how that's reflected in the ocean tides, in her ability to nourish, sustain, and regenerate life. And it's quite tragic and hurtful and injurious when you think about the violence that's experienced of the earth, exploitation from mining of resources, to extraction of water, to a number of violences that the earth experiences. Well, Indigenous women experience this also. Missing and murdered Indigenous women, that is in direct alignment with what's happening to violence against the earth. There's also really beautiful things around birthkeeping, motherhood, the revitalization of kinship systems, clanships, and cultural continuity, food systems that nourish Indigenous women through traditional healing methodologies, through food systems and medicines that Indigenous women specifically know and perpetuate through their traditional knowledges. So this is that program. And so it's really quite a very diverse range, from missing and murdered Indigenous women, addressing issues of trafficking that are happening, Indigenous women of the world are the most exploited, targeted, and trafficked Indigenous of the people around the world. And also the responsibility of bringing new life into the world is all within this program area. Maybe have the next slide, please. So this one has to do with our platform for action. This came out of a convening, well, it really came out of over 40 years of our organization doing work, and we annually do a Keeping the Home Fires Burning convening. And this platform for action was the brainchild of our president, Christopher Peters, and working collectively with our leadership and with hundreds of Indigenous peoples over the last many decades, we developed this platform for action for Indigenous peoples that helps to articulate not only action steps for our peoples and communities that could transcend different community contexts, but also it's a consciousness. It's a consciousness that, to some extent, at this time of pandemic, we're really being able to reflect on it, and to some extent, perhaps we're being able to deepen it in our own lives every day. It's not just a political statement. In fact, it's not a political statement. This is a statement about how we can conduct ourselves in our lives, how we can reorient ourselves, going back to that balance. This is what this platform is intended to help inspire and help to reflect, is a consciousness that's based on everlasting life and continuity and honor and respect, kindness, compassion, responsibility, relationship. That is what this platform is seeking to amplify in its articulation. And the next slide is the second part of that. To think about our behaviors and to think about it in these 7 of a re-indigenization, as we talked about, to regenerate, to reciprocate, renew, revitalize, reduce, and to retain. And we know that these are not the only things we should be thinking about. There's probably 1,000 more re's to think about, to remember, to restore, to reimagine. There's so many more things that we can do, but we wanted to outline, provide a basic structure, excuse me, of the opportunity to address things that are coming and to also reestablish and restore balance at this time that we're in now. The last slide, please. This is Native Pulse. We just launched this program in this time of pandemic, but also it's something we've been talking about for a long time. Years ago, Chris Peters, who's the president of the organization, I used to do a radio program on KHSU, back when there was KHSU. And it was a Native program that we had people call into, and we would explore and talk about any number of issues, like those same issues that we were talking about in the programming that I outlined earlier, as well as things that are just happening in Native communities that we may not have had the opportunity to learn about, that we wanted to share out more broadly. So the most recent reimagination of Native Pulse has just happened, and Raven Marshall, who's a young woman who works with us, is our creative associate, and Chris Peters are putting these together along with some other members of our creative team. And these will be coming from all points of the Indigenous world. You can go to 7th Generation Fund's Facebook page and listen to the first one, which was led by Chris Peters and anchored by Raven Marshall. Next slide, please. So in this time of change, in this time of reflection, and in this time of tremendous stress for Indigenous communities, our organization has established the Flickr Fund, and this is providing Indigenous peoples in community contexts support, direct support to community leaders and coordinators who are getting really necessary goods, food, clean water, medical supplies, traditional medicines, traditional foods, and other support systems, including things that might help their immune support, traditional medicines particularly, that we know and have used for centuries and centuries and centuries, that will help our communities continue to grow and not be the casualties of this pandemic. So this is the Flickr Fund, and we are working with right now, about 15 or 20 different projects all over the Indigenous world, from Kenya and Uganda to Australia to communities all over the so-called United States that are working very, very grassroots communities, often in very remote places where they cannot access other food systems or cannot access basic supplies for sanitation, for health, or for well-being. And we've launched this, and we are working with communities all over in order to help support them. And I wanted to make sure to inform everybody about this Flickr Fund, also for the local community here, in case there's a project that's working with the local Yurok, Karuk, Hupa, Taloa, or Riyak community. Thank you for sharing those slides, Shay. I think that helped articulate about the 7th Generation Fund, and I wanted to make sure to do that. I had the opportunity to serve this organization the last 27 years, and continues to be a privilege. At this time of transition and stress, it's challenging to do that work, but we're really happy to do it, honored to do it, and we'll continue to move our work forward for the well-being of our peoples.
Great. Thank you for that, Tia. Amazing overview. I'm very excited as a community member, as an Indigenous person, to have worked with 7th generations, whether it was time at the UN when our paths crossed about 7 years ago, 8, maybe 9 years ago or so, and then just the works along the way. So thank you. Some of the questions that we do have, and please, everybody in Facebook Live, please ask any questions and we'll read them throughout the series today. The first question is, how can our Indigenous way of knowing impact how we approach mental health in our society?
That's a good question. I think now more than ever, we're probably really confronted with reflecting on Indigenous ways of knowing. You know, sometimes Indigenous peoples are the last brought to the table if we're not already been made the meal. And at this really interesting time, I think is a time not only for our own reflection about what our strengths are and what our teachings are and what we can derive from them, but also where appropriate, what can be shared more broadly. I have to think about this also not just only in terms of mental health, but in a holistic way, in terms of our cultural health, in terms of our physical health, our spiritual health, our economic health, and our community-wide well-being. We know what we need. You know, it's been really interesting to see Indigenous communities around the world are closing down. They're shutting their borders. Indigenous communities around the world are expressing self-determination and sovereignty. Yes, it's in the context of this pandemic. It's in the context of wanting to make sure our peoples are safe, but there's some value in that. We know that we need to first turn inward, much like we do during ceremony. There's through fasting and through some of that spiritual time, there's an inward time of self-reflection, of strengthening. There's also an outward time. Right now, I really see there's a parallel between ceremonial time and this closing down of our borders. I think our people know we need to turn to each other, to look inward, take care of each other, to return to traditional foods, to replant our gardens, to use our medicines, to drink our teas, to gather the roots, the leaves, the berries, the information from the wind, the songs in our mountains, the language of our waters, to refuel ourselves before we open those borders again. I think those are the traditional knowledges that are going to help us. Mental health is certainly one of the positive outcomes, but it won't come without our physical health. It won't come without our spiritual health. It won't come without our collective well-being. Mental health, when it's in its negative state, in my opinion, is also a reflection, much like what happens to the bodies of Indigenous women. Negative mental health in Indigenous communities is also a reflection of what's happening to the land itself, it hurts us. So regenerating the land, healing ourselves will also result in positive mental outcomes.
I really appreciated how you talked about turning inward, especially during this time when so many families are struggling because we're not able to visit our extended family or community members, and how taking this time is about, we can reflect on it as a way of ceremony through our fasting and through the spiritual isolation and taking that time for ourselves. So thank you for that. I really appreciate it. One of our next questions is, in what ways do culture and language impact youth development?
Culture and language, I would have to say culture and language impacts all of our development. Even if we're teaching culture and language to young ones, that early imprinting to our little ones, I'm thinking about grandchildren and how that early imprinting of words, of tone, of behavior, and to identify with it in a positive way is a way to help nourish the identity of our young ones. It's hard to put like where would the age of youth begin. It starts in the womb. Going back to our Thriving Women's program, it starts because they hear things even while they are growing. They know things because of blood memory, even before they come into this world. There's a link between how we conduct ourselves while we're pregnant, who are around us, and what we even eat with the health and well-being of our children. Language and culture are essential to the well-being not only of our youth, but of all of our peoples. And at this time, the revitalization of language and culture, we're seeing it everywhere, certainly in the programming that we're doing with different communities all over, but also we're seeing it in Indigenous communities throughout, that our people know. That goes back to the first question. These are linked questions. We can't have mental health and overall well-being without language and culture. These are core components of what Indigenous peoples need, and really all peoples. Everyone is Indigenous to somewhere. And to have that tie back to land, to have that tie back to spirit and to heart, I think will make the whole world a better place. Maybe that's what this time is forcing us to do. People are turning inward, really microcosms of existence in one's homes when we have them, within our own selves. And finding those messages will help us when we open these doors and reemerge into a new world.
Thank you. I really am thinking about the link of connection that surround us that you talked about, and how we can't talk about mental health without addressing our emotional, our physical, our spiritual well-being as well. So, and how they all link together, and who we choose and what we choose to surround ourselves with. So that impact on culture and language for me is about setting that example and doing positive contributions to our community, whether we're out in the front like as advocacies, or we're behind the scenes as our silent warriors, as some described. So just that connection and that link to who and what is around us. So thank you.
We're all a system. We're all part of we are all an ecosystem, and each are part of something that contributes to the greater good.
So within that ecosystem, is there one word or a phrase that, that for you that is speaks to being Indigenous? So one word represents.
Oh, wow. I think each of our peoples probably have our own words. But if I were to do it, I'm gonna have to give you a hyphenated one. And it would be, and I'd have to credit my husband, Chris, with it. Earth-based. We are earth-based peoples. We know the mother, the first mother and our common mother is Mother Earth. We know that. And we are earth-based. From that relationship with the earth, we have relationships with our lands, our waters, the trees, the birds, each other. Markers on the land, markers on Mother Earth are the cultural signposts of our existence in each our own territories. We know the earth is our mother, and we are earth-based peoples.
Yeah, that really resonates with myself, and I know a lot of our viewers, is that as your husband, Chris Peters, he's a co-author in CamTem, and he talks about the revitalizations and the community coming together for one of our world renewal ceremonies, and how we are earth renewal people and our responsibility to that, and how we carry ourselves and how we represent our families. So earth-based people, thank you. We have a few questions on Facebook here. We have from Charlie Reed. At what point did you realize that Native nonprofit organizations was a needed form for development for us Indigenous folks?
Well, thank you for your question, Charlie. I didn't decide it. I'm not a founder of the organization. I'm just really one of the seeds that helps it grow. So the organization was founded in 1977, and our early founders, I don't even know if they knew that nonprofits, right? Like a Native nonprofit was the way to go. I think what they wanted to do is help the people. And the nonprofit structure now, as well as then, became the shape that it took. But things manifest themselves in whatever shape needs to take form to respond to any given situation. So right now, it's Native nonprofits. And Native nonprofits offer something so unique and have an opportunity to be nimble and flexible and to work very directly with Indigenous communities, at least ours does, in very direct and responsive ways, to be accountable to the Indigenous communities that we're working with. I think Native nonprofits offer that. And for Seventh Generation Fund for Indigenous Peoples, we've never received state or federal funds. So we're always raising money and regranting it and putting it out there in our programming. And that's the form that we take. I think there's a lot of different shapes and forms that support to our peoples can take, though. And in collaboration with tribal nations, there can be a lot of really good work that can take shape.
Within that, can you explain a little bit more how Native nonprofits and your work with the United Nations, and how, a question from Dr. Virgil Moorhead, how the United Nations, the impact as well as the international communities, especially with those who serve on your board?
That's been really interesting. There's two parts to this. Well, maybe there's many parts to this. I think Indigenous peoples, and certainly one of my first mentors in the international arena, particularly the late Tanya Gunella Frischner from the Onondaga Nation, who was also our chairperson for a number of years and served on our board. She also served at the United Nations Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues representing North America. And you met Tanya, I remember.
Mm-hmm.
You did, yeah. She would say, our peoples are naturally built for this international arena. We understand ourselves as nations. We understand negotiation. We understand diplomacy. We understand respect. And we can work in these arenas very naturally. At the same time that she was completely right, our early years entering into the international arena on occasion were sometimes we stumbled a little bit because it seemed very, maybe we were impressed, maybe we weren't, maybe we were overwhelmed, maybe we weren't. The United Nations seemed like a very far away place.
Mm-hmm.
In 1977, when on First Avenue, right by the United Nations, there was a row of Indigenous peoples, including some of our leaders that were trying to get into the building. Across the street were police and police dogs saying, you Indigenous peoples, you cannot come into this building. And there was a standoff, another of the many kinds of front lines that we stand on all the time. And many of our leaders said, we're going to, one of these days, enter that building, and we have some things to share with the world. Later, people did, from our board member, Chief Oren Lyons of the Onondaga Nation, or grandfathers David Mananya or Thomas Banyaka from Hopi, who are still remembered not only for the cornmeal that they sprinkled in front of the steps of the United Nations, but after they spoke, the windows shook and there came a storm. The work of the Seventh Generation Fund and the for Indigenous peoples in the international arena follows their footsteps, and it attempts to penetrate a very colonial and narrow consciousness, and to bring our voices into an international discourse and conversation, to say not only do we have something to contribute to this conversation, but many of our leaders even prophesized that we'd be all standing here together as Indigenous and non-Indigenous nations of the world to talk about what our future looks like. Now the Seventh Generation Fund has economic and social development consultative status with the United Nations. So we have a specific role in the UN to consult with them about Indigenous peoples and what we have to offer to the world arena.
Thank you for that. And just your very visual description of the event that took place there was powerful. And, you know, as those watching, what are some first ways or some first steps in order to get into advocacy work, or what were your first steps in leading you to the path that you're on today? Because the impact, the social impact that yourself and Seven Generations are having on our community is very tremendous and very heartfelt.
No, I really appreciate that question. I've had a lot of really good teachers. I've had a lot of good teachers. I'm sure I've learned things from you, Sina, too. You know, I think for real, we have opportunities to learn all the time. And I think that being open to that and knowing that we never know, firstly, where our front line is going to be. Just like I don't know if in 77 and in 1,000 other places, if our leaders knew that that was a front line right there across from the UN, they probably learned pretty quick. But right at that moment, they were trying to get in and realizing that it was being barricaded, that we weren't welcome there.
Yeah.
We have the opportunity to recognize front lines and to go around them, to surmount them, to move them forward, to not let them crush us. We have the opportunity to learn from the littlest amongst us to the ones that have years and years and years and years and decades ahead of us, and to really see ourselves really as just one of many seeds that are contributing to the great diversity of seeds that we need to perpetuate life, right? What does that look like? Anyone who knows forests, as you all do here, knows that forests are not one tree. There are a multitude of plants and animals and life, moisture and dryness, all of it coming together to make something that can regenerate life. I look at our work at Seventh Generation Fund as one of those many things that contributes to the well-being of Indigenous peoples. And me as a person, I'm like a little hummingbird or ladybug on one of those plants, hopefully doing my job so that everything replenishes.
Yeah, I really appreciate that, because I visualize how, you know, our indigenous plants, our trees, our natural resources communicate with each other just like we do in this human form. And so what we put out into the world, we will receive, is one of my beliefs, and how just the positive, you know, struggling at times, yes, of course, you know, going head to head on these challenging issues, but yet we're still here, we're resilient, and we will continue to remain here. And what you talked about is having a lot of good teachers, especially those from all different ages, whether they're elders who passed on or young as Uriah that is popping in and out of the videos here. He is our future leader. And one of the sayings or quotes that I resonate with from Seven Generations in your team is that to be a good ancestor. Can you explain a little bit more in your words to that?
Well, we are already the ancestors, just like we are the descendants the moment we're born or the moment we are even conceived, right? So we are the ancestors of those future generations, and part of that is really informed by the organizational name too, right? So the Seventh Generation Fund is that specifically comes from a principle of the Haudenosaunee. Some people know them as the Iroquois, but the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, one of our founders was from there. And they say, in every deliberation, consider the impact on the seventh generation to come. Or step tenderly on the skin of Mother Earth, because the faces of the unborn generations are turned upward, watching all that we see from beneath the ground. So we're already ancestors. Everything that we do or say, every song, every thought, every positive action, and every negative one, places where we need to grow, or that, we show our vulnerability, places where we're challenged. Each of those things inform our next generations. So it is incumbent upon us to be our best possible selves. And it is not always easy. These days right now are really challenging all of us in so many ways. And we're all trying to restore that balance within ourselves. And so what can we see from this time where we can grow? How can we be stronger? How can we make connections that foster a better world for the next generation, not only for our children or our grandchildren, but their great-grandchildren? What does that look like? What do we want for them? And if we can visualize it, we can pray for it, if we can sing for it, if we can dance for it, that's the best use of our time and energy.
Thank you. That step tremendously really resonates with me, because it's about for me, it's about how I interact with people and how I represent myself and family. And just like, the 7th generations, we come from a long line of umbilical cords that are warriors, that are innovators, that are scientists, mathematicians, that are advocates that truly have given their everything for us to be here today. So I'm looking on Facebook. If anybody has any questions or comments that they would like read, please post. And then we will also, this is a live recording too, and we'll be posting this on our YouTube channel. So please, the link will be posted on our Two Feathers page. And so please feel free to comment and view our new and improving YouTube channel. Tia or Shay, do you have anything else you'd like to add?
Yeah, Tia, I just wanted to say thank you for agreeing to come on our Facebook show. I know I wasn't very responsive because I have an infant in the background, but he seems to have quieted down now. So I just really wanted to say thank you. Your words are always so beautiful to listen to, especially talking about the next 7th gen as a new mom, and thinking about that too during this whole talk. I appreciate it so much. Thank you.
Well, thank you
so
for
Tia,
the opportunity. I really appreciate the opportunity. I'm so impressed and so honored to be part of this process. And I know we're all figuring it out, right? This is not necessarily a normal way for us to have these kinds of conversations, but I guess it's the new normal for today. And maybe we'll learn some skills, and we'll learn some new ways of doing things that will help inform whatever moves forward. I'm thrilled to do this on behalf of the 7th Generation Fund for Indigenous Peoples, and to support your good work at Two Feathers, and everything that you're trying to do here in the local community. It's really an honor, and we're open to partnering with you, and really thank you for this opportunity.
Yes, thank you again, Tia. You're strong, you're beautiful, you're intelligent, and thank you for the work that you do.
Thank you, and I welcome everybody to do one thing, is to take a breath and let ourselves know that we will get through this. We will be stronger, and our ancestors already know